So let's just take a deep breath. And we're here in Live Oak at Center for Spiritual Living, Santa Cruz, located on Felt Street, and we're broadcasting our Sunday service. My name is Reverend Alice Reed, and I'm here to talk to you about something that I've coined radical inclusion. Now, we've been talking about inclusion in action all month, but this is the fifth Sunday that we're looking at this topic, and so I want to talk to you about what radical inclusion means to me. And actually, before I get too far, I want to send a special thank you to all our firefighters and first responders who were so valiant in their efforts to support the Santa Cruz Mountains and the San Mateo area in the CZU fires that we have been dealing with. I'm happy to report to you that most of our every member that I have spoken to has told me that their houses and their homes were spared. And so I really want to thank you for your prayers and your support and your continued support, because there are a lot of people who did lose their homes. So thank you. So as we look at this idea of powerful principle in action in the form of radical inclusion, what are we talking about? We're talking about this idea of not just inviting people to be with us in the way that we're used to being, but we're really looking at radical inclusion as this or inclusion in and of itself as this idea of bringing people together of different thinking, different ways of being, different races, different religions, that inclusion really talks about that I recognize your differences and you recognize mine, and that we come together to find that sweet spot where we can work together and we can celebrate all of our differences. You know, nature models diversity for us when you think about the power of biodiversity versus monodiversity. When you have monodiversity, you have one crop, and that crop utilizes the soil, takes the same nutrients time after time, year after year, and adds the same things to the soil year after year. And after a while, that soil needs a lot of adamants, and it becomes stale and almost dead. But when you have biodiversity and you're rotating your crops through your soil, what you find is that different plants actually enhance the soil while other plants deplete the soil. And so when we're working with this idea of diversity and inclusion, it's the same principle, and we really need to take a page from nature and look at how when we are working together and we have our differences, that there may be times when we're drawing energy from each other, and there may be times when we're really bringing energy to the table, but that it's a beautiful dance so that we can create something new. Earlier in our service, in the first broadcast, this is take 2, I shared with you a wonderful quote from Richard Rohr, and so I want to share it with you again. He's been writing about order, disorder, and reorder, and I excerpted some of what he said, and he states, if we're going to rebuild society, we first need to be rebuilt ourselves. A healthy psyche lives within at least 3 levels of meaning: the individual, or my story, the collective, or our story, and the universal, the divine, and the story. And Rohr's quote really suggests that as if we are attempting to rebuild the society from the outside in, then we've kind of got it backwards, because it won't work as well that way if we're continuing to work. And if we've talked about this in our teaching, if you're working at the level of condition, you are working at the level of something that's already been created, and you're not including the creative process. And so Rohr, like Centers for Spiritual Living, subscribes to this idea that you have to work from the inside out. And he's suggesting that we take this approach by finding meaning at all three levels of the self, the collective, and the divine. That we need to begin to look at the deeper meaning at each level. And while they may not be easy for us to integrate, it might be downright hard for you to integrate the things that you know to be true for you as opposed to the things that you're seeing in your society. Our work in this idea of radical inclusion is to begin to find some common ground and to allow ourselves to really be lifted up to the story, the bigger story, the greater reality that's trying to tease itself out. You know, I don't know about you, but there's a lot in the news right now. I mean, I can't talk to anyone without having a conversation come up about the political divisiveness that's happening in our society right now. And I want to tell you that while I identify with one particular party, I decided to watch both conventions. And, you know, it was easier for me to watch one convention than the other. I will admit that. But I felt that it was important for me, if I was going to try to integrate my story with our story, that I had to broaden how I was seeing things, that I needed to stay curious, and I needed to begin to look at those places for understanding. And I needed to press into that almost razor's edge of finding understanding without agreeing. Not only that, I feel like the call is to find a place in me that I can come to an understanding, and I don't have to agree, but I have to be willing to look past the opinions, look past the ego's assertion of what it is that they want to create in the world, and begin to see an inkling, just an inkling of what wants to be created. Because I really believe that, you know, it's that quote that I'm sure I used it already this month, when we talk about Einstein, who has that wonderful quote that the mind that created the problem cannot see the solution. And in order for me to step back and to be able to have an inkling of what the solution might be, I need to be able to have a greater understanding. So it's easy for me to drop into my story. It's a lot harder for me to drop into our story and to begin to have a greater understanding. The other individual that I'm getting a lot of guidance from is a fellow by the name of Matt Kahn. And Matt Kahn wrote a beautiful book called Whatever Arises, Love That. And one of the suggestions that he has for what I would call radical inclusion is to ask yourself, what would love do? And if we think about love not in the romantic sense and not in the idea of familiar love or affectionate love, but in that true agape love, then we want to ask agape love what it would do. Now, I know what you're thinking. If you've been really trapped by the divisiveness that's out there in the political atmosphere, you're thinking, oh, no, this is not okay. I'm not going to love that. I want to suggest that that might be your ego. That there's something that wants to move through you so that something new, something that combines all of life comes forward that is larger than the reality that we're in touch with right now. I like to think that we are multidimensional beings and that we can begin to press in and up-level ourselves so that we can see be in touch with my story, our story, and the story, and begin to see all three at the same time. I'm not suggesting that you call it all good. Yeah, they're doing something that I think is atrocious and disgusting. It's all good. No, that's not going to work, is it? I'm not suggesting that at all. But I am suggesting that we press into this unknown territory from which we have not, as a society or as a culture or even as a humanity as a whole, have navigated easily. there are some beings who have done it with brilliance, right? I'm thinking of Mother Teresa. I'm thinking of Gandhi. I'm thinking of Martin Luther King. I'm thinking of Jesus, the master teacher. I'm thinking of the Buddha. There are different ways that we can approach this, and we do have some examples for it. And I think when we get really lost in the my story and seeing how it's different from our story, then we lose sight of the story. We lose sight of the bigger picture. And it's that dualistic mind that we're working with that can't possibly see the story through the lens of only my story or the lens of only our story. We have to be able to look at all three dimensions at the same time so that we can up-level ourselves and hence up-level our society. I love what Matt Kahn talks about. He did a talk, I'm not sure exactly when it was, but he did a talk at Mile High Centers for Spiritual Living in Denver a little while back. And he talked about this exact thing, about how do we step into this place to ask that bigger question, what would love do? And he made some really, some points that really kind of hit me right between the eyes. He talked about the idea that when we come up against something that we're unwilling to try to understand and when we're trying to integrate in at some level, when we come up to that opposing opinion and we just, draw our line in the sand and we refuse to look at it, what happens is that on some level we are making an agreement to carry that pain within us instead of being the healers that we have come here to be. I know. It's not easy. Everything in me says, but if I try to love that, whatever that is, whatever's triggering me, if I try to love that, well, then I'm going to be allowing it. I'm going to be acquiescing to it. I don't think so. One of the things that Matt suggests that we do, and you've probably heard this in one form or another, but I think we have to do it at a whole nother level, and that is to begin to bless the person that we are disagreeing with, the person that we are different from, the person that we don't understand, to really bless them, to want for them that everything that their hearts desire comes forward for them. And the reason he suggests that this might work is because when we can do that, when we can truly bless somebody and we want their heart to be open and we want their heart to feel the joy of what is their soul's meaning in life, when we can really want that for another person despite our differences, and when they can experience that on any level, well, then they begin to experience fulfillment. And when they begin to experience fulfillment, then they're no longer operating at that level of ego. They're no longer operating at that level of hurt. One of my good friends, the musician Bob Sima, wrote a beautiful song, "Hurt People, Hurt People." And so what I know is that many of us, especially in these times right now, where we're dealing with so much uncertainty. We have, the climate change, the political divisiveness. People are actually experiencing, there's bona fide injury out there. And I want to say that it's bringing up trauma and it's bringing up hurt. But it's not bringing it up to torture you. It's not bringing it up to continue to keep you in that soup of trauma. It's bringing it up so that you can begin to reach inside into that place in our heart that knows that we have never been harmed or hurt or diminished. I was thinking about the firemen who worked so valiantly and are still working valiantly in the Santa Cruz Mountains to manage the fire. We're up to 35% controlled right now. And I was heard from one of our members who said that at 9 o'clock at night, the firemen came in knocking on the door. You have to get out now. And what I know about those firemen is they were moving through the mountains and they were trying to evacuate people. They weren't stopping in front of each door and saying, "Is that a Republican in there? Maybe it's a Democrat. Maybe it's a Jew or a Christian. Maybe it's somebody who's black or white." No, there was no question. It was another human being. And they were responding with love and care, deep care. And it seems to me that when we have a crisis in our world, it's easy, right, to have that knee-jerk reaction of deep care for each other, and we completely lose sight of all these man-made, woman-made, person-made, humanity-made boundaries that we create, these walls that we create between each other. The question I have is, when are we going to do it voluntarily? When are we going to begin to allow ourselves to transcend the walls and the divides that we have created between each other? And when are we going to allow ourselves to step up and to love so deeply that we can find that place of common ground and understanding? I got to tell you, I can't wait for someone else to do it first. I feel called to step into that place of deeper understanding and curiosity. I have been harassed by people who say, if you don't hate the other person, if you don't hate that candidate, then you stand for nothing. Folks, I don't stand for hate, I stand for love. And so I'm learning how to stand up for love without acquiescing and with greater understanding. Because what I know about myself is, if I allow myself to succumb to that place of hate, it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I'm the one that gets poisoned by it. We have a high road ahead of us. It's a tall order. I know it. I know I'm asking you for a tall order right now to find a way to love whatever arises. But in this moment, what I know is that this is what we're being called forth to do. That this is the moment. As one of my friends who's a minister says, this is not a drill. We've done a lot of practice. It's time to do it. It's time to walk it out. It's time to lean into love. It's time to learn how to operate from my story, our story, and the story, and to continue to lean into that place. You know, there's a piece of scripture, you're probably familiar with it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then the scripture goes on to say, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of the Most High, and that the Most High causes the sun to rise on the good and the bad. That the Most High causes the rain to rain on the righteousness and the unrighteousness. And what that really means is that we really are one, that our work is to learn to love each other in a way that I can love the individual and not like or not accept the thing that the individual is doing that is not okay. This is a growing edge. This is the razor's edge, and we all have to walk it. So join me, won't you, as we learn how to love our enemies, as we continue to love our neighbors, as we continue to press into this growing edge for humanity. We are the ones we've been waiting for to do it, and it's up to us. Let's pray. So I know that there is a power and a presence that moves in, as, and through all life. that this presence is indeed finding its way in my heart. Not because it needs to work towards it, because I am allowing it, because I am allowing my heart and my mind to be opened and guided and guarded and directed. So I know in these what seem like dark days that we are facing right here and right now, I know that there is a greater good that is coming forth, and I choose to love. I choose to love all that comes up before me. I choose to love what arises, not so that I can just call it all good and accept it at face value, but that I can press in and find out how my love can shift any situation that I find myself in. So I trust that I will always be guided. I trust that even my triggers are the guidance from the divine and the universe for me to step out of my story, to see our story, and begin to connect myself with the story of oneness, the story of deep love, the story of creation that is always moving through humanity, whether we are conscious of it or not. And so I know right now in this moment as I speak this word for myself, and I speak this for anyone in the sound of my voice. I speak this word for all of humanity. That when we're willing to choose love, it is love that guides us. When we're willing to choose love, it's love that directs us. When we're willing to choose love, it's love that manifests. I take great joy in knowing this highest truth for myself and for all of humanity, and I simply release my word into the action of the law, and I know that I trust that it is the law that carries this forward. It is the law that puts before me that which I am to love, that which I am to care for, that which I am to do. I simply surrender, and it is with a grateful and love-filled heart that I release this word, knowing it is done, and so it is.